Hello and welcome back to another book review. First of all, if you are new here, I post new book reviews almost every single day on both fiction and non-fiction books, and I also love to take suggestions. So if you're looking to follow book reviews, suggest books for me to read, or just want some reading inspiration for the fall/winter months here in the Northern Hemisphere, then feel free to stick around. Today, I am going to be reviewing a book that I checked out mostly because the title intrigued me and I wanted to see what the book was all about, and that is Michigan Barns, Etc. Rural Buildings of the Great Lake State by Jerry R. Davis. So this is what the cover looks like. The book is a little bigger than your average book, and the book is set up with pencil drawings on one side and an explanation of the building in question at the bottom side. So this is how it's set up, each page in a row like this. So I was intrigued because I didn't know what the author was going to include in the word etc. So we have Michigan Barns, etc. I didn't know what was going to be in etc. There also seemed to be some cool pencil drawings of rural buildings, and I grew up in a small town in a more rural agricultural area. Sorry, my cat is hitting the door. And so this kind of scenery in the Midwest is very pretty to me. I enjoy looking at it. It kind of reminds me of home, although I don't really live too far from home currently, but I just enjoy the scenes, the nature, and also the rural buildings, a barn in a cornfield. It all reminds me of home, and I like the way it looks. So I wanted to get this out and read it. So the author Jerry R. Davis is originally from a small town in Michigan called Vassar, Michigan. I actually know where Vassar, Michigan is, believe it or not, even though it is a very small town. I actually spent a lot of time there a couple years back for various reasons. So it's weird that the same tiny small town, out of the tens of thousands of small towns in the Midwest, the author comes from a very small town that I'm actually quite familiar with, which was just kind of interesting. However, he moved down to New Mexico after teaching in Michigan for a number of years. He decides to come back every couple years or every year to Michigan, and he really enjoys looking at this rural scenery, for lack of a better term, the barns, the outhouses, the sheds, the covered bridges in Michigan, primarily around the region of the state that he's from, the thumb area. So Michigan is shaped like a thumb for those of you, or like a hand for those of you who don't know Michigan geography. And so there's like a region that's in the thumb. That's where the city of Vassar, Michigan is, and that is where he spends most of his time and does most of these drawings. He does do the pencil drawings himself, and he does branch out a little bit from Vassar, Michigan, but he really stays in the thumb area primarily. This is, as I mentioned, just him going around and drawing these barns, these outhouses. So it was like barns, outhouses, tool sheds, cattle areas, covered bridges, churches, schools. That was kind of what he was including in this rural buildings, and he would take pencil drawings of this area and attempt to find out information about the history. It kind of is a focus on the more mundane of the things that are day-to-day, the barns, the tool sheds, the carriage houses as they were called. And I found it interesting that he takes time to focus to learn about when this farm was built, when the farm was purchased, when the barn went up, what the barn was used for. The smaller facets of history, the parts of history that aren't going to make it into the big history books that we all study, but that make up the patchwork of the area that we live in, or that we grow up in, or that we travel to. So I like that he takes the time to focus on these smaller moments in history, and I really appreciate his dedication to learning more about all these places that he draws. Primarily, he is drawing these things because he enjoys looking at them, and then he tries to learn the history behind them. That was the way I understood it. It wasn't like he was necessarily looking for key historical barns. However, the things that looked rather interesting or unique tended to have an interesting or unique history behind them. For example, there was a barn in the shape of an octagon. That is a very unique shape for a barn. However, it also had a unique history because someone took the time to make it in an octagon. He takes some time too to kind of fix up the barn. So some of these barns or wooden structures are no longer in use as farming kind of maybe gets consolidated or gets put into more modern facilities. So some of these barns are actually in the process of collapsing. Some of the barns, since he drew them, have totally collapsed, or they're just in a state of disrepair, and he takes the liberty to kind of fix them up to see how they would have been when they were standing in their pristine form, which some people might take offense with, or not offense with, but it's not true historical accuracy in the sense that he's not drawing it as it was the day that he went there to draw it. But I think it kind of, in my opinion, that's allowed in the artistic liberty of drawing these barns, etc. if you enjoy, here's the octagon barn that I mentioned. I've actually heard of this barn before. I have not seen it, but I have heard of it. So, the Thumb Octagon Barn. So if you're interested in rural buildings, if anything that I've said sounds interesting, this is definitely a hidden gem. I'm glad that I checked it out. The pencil drawings were really, at least according to me, well done. I don't have an ounce of artistic talent, so if anyone can draw and what they draw looks like something that I can recognize, I consider it well drawn. The drawings are interesting, good. The history is perfect. This is about the right amount of history I want for each little thing. I appreciate his dedication to local history. I appreciate his willingness to find out more about these buildings that are often overlooked and perhaps even crumbling back into the ground and will soon return to nature. He's taking time to preserve these little moments of history, of local history, or at least history local to that area, and I think it's going to be a really appreciated effort. I think this is the kind of work and task that maybe doesn't get a lot of traction or notice when it's first done, but the older the book gets, this is something that kind of ages. As a lot of these buildings disappear, are changed, aren't preserved, are repurposed, we're going to have this book to look back on and see some of the history while people who were living and remembered the history still lived. He's taking the time to record this history, to record these buildings, and it's something that I think is going to be more appreciated and more valuable the older the book gets. Sometimes when a book ages, it becomes outdated. This is the kind of book preserving that local history at a time when it happened that is going to be more appreciated the older the book gets. That's my personal opinion. This book was written, I want to say 10, 15 years ago, 2011, so 2021, 12 years ago. And that is, yeah, not super old, but we're already a decade on from when this was written. Perhaps the people he interviewed in this book have passed on, and so him preserving this is just really interesting, and I commend the effort, and I think it was really well done. As I said, if anything in here that I've been talking about sounds interesting, then give this a read. Michigan Barns, etc. Rural Buildings of the Great Lakes State by Jerry R. Davis. I really appreciate the author's work drawing and collecting the history, and I thought it was a great read. Better than expected, which is always a good sign. If you have anything to say about this book, any book similar you would like to recommend, or if you have another suggestion that you would like me to read, please put it in the comments below. I love to hear it. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of